Hello and welcome to myfinancesteacher.org. In this video I want to talk about Bitcoin again a little bit, and here on the 11th of April I posted a restricted material to the gold members on my website, that's myfinancesteacher.org, about a relatively risky trade on trying to catch a move, possibly testing this upper range of the Bollinger Bands and possibly breaking above the 50-day moving average. That's because, as I mentioned in the previous videos, it's often the case that the tops of these 2-month cycles in Bitcoin do close above the 50-day moving average. Of course, sometimes they only retest that 50-day moving average without closing above, but in most cases, the top of this 2-month cycle takes place above the 50-day moving average. So that was a risky trade, and we took that. Since that trade, let me actually move into a 4-hour chart so that we can see more detail over here. So we took that on the 11th of April, somewhere around here, somewhere at the price of around 69.16, let's say 69.20. And we had a stop loss at these recent lows. That's somewhere at about 67.50 or something like that, and a trailing stop loss. What happened since then was an increase in Bitcoin price up towards 7,200, but again, there was no guarantee of this price rise. This trade was risky, as I mentioned in that restricted video. I might actually post that video to the general public soon, as it's already been delayed enough. And since that, this decline in Bitcoin actually triggered our trailing stop loss. I think I had a whole $200 as a trailing stop loss. I probably should have made it a bit smaller, so I got out at about 7,000. So that's a tiny profit, just over 1% profit. And it was a pretty risky trade. I'm not really sure if it was actually worth trying, but the reason I've reviewed what we've done over the last few days is because there is a similar setup again, and I want to try this trade again. As I mentioned in that previous video, it's possibly greed talking in me, as we've seen this relatively nice rise all through since the middle of March. So I might be too greedy over here, which means it's possibly not a good idea to follow me on this trade. And again, this is not an investment advice. I don't really provide investment advice. What I do is I share my opinion with you guys, and based on the information I provide, you might want to adjust your own analysis. So what do I see here is a small green candle on the 4-hour chart. And that kind of gives me a nice entry because I have an idea where to place a stop loss. Looking at the daily chart again, I want to point out a couple of things. Firstly, this cycle has been going on for 31 days, which means we are probably just around the midpoint of this cycle in terms of a regular cycle duration of around 2 months. So this trade is pretty risky. There's no guarantee that the price is going to go up from here. There's actually a high chance that the price is going to drop. But what I see on the daily chart is here between the 8th and 10th of April, we tested that 50-day moving average again. On the first attempt, Bitcoin was rejected from that 50-day moving average on the 10th of April. A little later, on the 12th of April, Bitcoin retested that 50-day moving average again. So that's a second knock on this 50-day moving average. Currently, 50-day moving average is at about 71.60, let's say, and moving down to the 4-hour chart. That is only about 5.5% higher compared to the current price. But, well, there is still a chance that Bitcoin might break higher than that 50-day moving average. But remember, that chance is not very high. And looking at RSI, in recent few days, the highest that RSI has reached is 57.4. So there is still some distance until that overbought area. The 20-day moving average is at 67.60. So if we do manage to close above that 20-day moving average, and let's move down to the 1-hour chart, if we manage to break up from this bear flag, so it is very risky. One could see a bear flag over here on the chart. There's your flagpole, there's your flag itself. Again, it is a bear flag, which means it's very risky to go long at the moment, as we might continue this decline for another few weeks down into the 2-month cycle low for Bitcoin. But if we break above this upper range of the bear flag, possibly invalidating this bearish formation. And if we break above that 20-day moving average, which was at about 67.60, by the way, which coincides with the top of this bear flag, then I will actually try to go long with a very, very tight stop loss. I'll probably use this recent low as a stop loss. That's at about 66.60. And I will go long once we break up from this bear flag and up from the 20-day moving average. So if I see 67.70, for example, I'm going to go long, and compared to the recent low of 66.60, that gives me a risk of around 1.7% on the downside. And on the upside, if we just retest the 50-day moving average, which is at about 71.60, over the entry price of 67.70, as I said, that's over 5%. And there might also be a chance we retest the top of that Bollinger Band and possibly even retest the 200-day moving average. So again, just like in the previous case, this trade is very risky, and I'm only going to place a tiny amount of money into this trade. But so far, cryptos have been doing well for about a month, and I feel like having another stab at it. And a very similar thing actually is happening in Ethereum as well. And we mentioned Ethereum in our previous video. In this one, I don't want to spend time on that, but a similar situation happened. We had a modest increase, then a trailing stop loss with really tiny profits. I might have a small tiny bit of stab at Ethereum as well if it breaks up from that bear flag. So there you go. I wish you a nice day and good luck in your trades.